In the years following Alexander the Great's death, his once unified empire splintered into a series of warring kingdoms, each ruled by his former generals, known as the Diadochi. Their infighting cast the Mediterranean world into chaos, a vacuum of power that would give rise to new contenders. Among these figures was Pyrrhus of Epirus, a young king with a storied military lineage. Born into a family famed for its warrior ethos, Pyrrhus grew up immersed in the brutal realities of battle and leadership. After reclaiming his kingdom from usurpers, he proved his prowess alongside the greatest generals of the era, including Antigonus and Demetrius. His reputation as both a fierce warrior and a master tactician began to spread. By 280 BC, Pyrrhus had consolidated his rule in the east and set his sights on expanding his influence. The growing power of Rome, as it began to push southward into Magna Graecia, threatened the Greek colonies in southern Italy. One such colony, Tarentum, had long been a powerful city-state. After a series of provocations, including an attack on Roman ships and the humiliation of Roman envoys, Tarentum found itself facing the threat of Roman retaliation. Desperate, the Tarentines sent an embassy to Epirus, asking for Pyrrhus's aid. Seeing an opportunity to establish a foothold in Italy, Pyrrhus agreed, but on the condition that he would be given supreme command over their forces. To further bolster his position, Pyrrhus received additional troops from Ptolemy of Macedon, 5,000 extra phalangites. With an army of 20,000 Macedonian phalangites, 3,000 cavalry, 2,000 archers, 500 slingers, and 20 war elephants, Pyrrhus set sail for Italy. Upon landing in southern Italy in early 280 BC, Pyrrhus immediately began militarizing Tarentum and consolidating his position. Meanwhile, the Romans, under the command of Consul Publius Valerius Laevinus, also prepared for war. Laevinus led a force of 40,000 men, marching directly toward the Greek city of Heraclea, aiming to engage Pyrrhus before his allies could reinforce him. As the Romans advanced, they raided the countryside, pushing southward to force a confrontation. The two armies met near the banks of the Ceres River, where Pyrrhus had arranged his forces in a defensive posture. His army, a formidable mix of the Macedonian phalanx, allied Greek troops, and war elephants, stood ready. On the flanks, the famed Thessalian cavalry, known for their speed and maneuverability, waited for the signal to strike. Pyrrhus, experienced and methodical, planned to hold his ground until reinforcements arrived, intending to exploit both his superior numbers and the terrain. The Roman army, under Consul Laevinus, formed up in its standard manipular formation. The eager Hastati formed the front line, supported by the more seasoned Principes behind them and the hardened Triarii in reserve. At the forefront, the Velites, light infantry equipped with javelins, prepared to screen the Roman advance. On the wings, 2,400 Roman cavalry stood ready to counter Pyrrhus's cavalry threat. As dawn broke, both sides understood the gravity of the battle to come. Though Pyrrhus preferred strategic maneuvering, Laevinus sought to seize the initiative. In a bold move, he ordered the entire Roman force of over 40,000 soldiers to cross the Ceres River. Pyrrhus's light infantry skirmishers pelted the advancing Romans with arrows and javelins, hoping to slow them down. The Roman vanguard pressed forward undeterred, their disciplined march accompanied by the deafening roar of thousands of men wading through the water. To their left, Roman Equites cavalry, having crossed upstream, smashed into Pyrrhus's missile units, scattering them in disarray. Realizing the river defense was collapsing, Pyrrhus acted swiftly. Riding at the head of 3,000 elite Thessalian cavalry, he charged directly into the Roman light infantry vanguard, halting their advance and giving his phalanx time to form its deadly wall of pikes. By then, the entire Roman army had successfully crossed the Ceres River, forming into their familiar manipular formation. The Roman hastati soon reached the Epirote line. Their superior armor and discipline were evident as they clashed against the dense ranks of the Greek phalangites. Pyrrhus himself was caught in the thick of the melee, nearly being unseated by a Roman soldier. At this critical moment, his trusted companion Megacles swapped armor with the king, donning Pyrrhus's distinctive gear and riding back into the fray. The ruse confused the Romans, momentarily shifting their focus. Despite the fierce Roman assault, the impenetrable wall of pikes slowly began pushing the legions backward toward the river. The Romans fought with tenacity, but they struggled to penetrate the phalanx or find an opportunity to outflank it. Victory seemed within Pyrrhus's grasp until disaster struck. Megacles, wearing the king's armor, was slain by a Roman soldier. His helmet was paraded along the Roman lines, igniting a surge of morale among the legions while demoralizing the Epirates, who believed their king had fallen. Sensing the danger, Pyrrhus galloped up and down his lines, shouting to his men that he was alive and rallying their spirits. With morale restored, he unleashed his war elephants, which had been kept in reserve. The massive beasts, towering over the battlefield, thundered into the Roman flanks. For most Roman soldiers, this was their first encounter with such creatures, and the sight alone was enough to send shockwaves through their ranks. The Roman cavalry panicked, their horses bolting in fear and trampling through their own infantry, further splintering the formation. Even the hardened legionnaires began to waver and retreat. Pyrrhus, sensing victory, ordered his Thessalian cavalry to pursue the fleeing Romans along the riverbank. The rout was complete. By the end of the bloody engagement, around 7,000 Romans lay dead on the field, with another 2,000 captured. Pyrrhus had secured a hard-fought victory, but at great cost. He lost approximately 4,000 men, including many seasoned officers. Though victorious at Heraclea, Pyrrhus emerged with a sobering realization. Rome's resilience made them a foe, unlike any he had faced. Even in defeat, the Romans fought with unyielding determination and retreated with discipline, signaling that they would never yield. The victory was a stark warning. Rome, though momentarily beaten, was far from broken, and every win would come at a heavy price. Pyrrhus knew the war for Italy was far from over. In the wake of the costly Roman defeat at Heraclea in 280 BC, the Republic did what it had always done. It regrouped, rebuilt, and returned. Consul Publius Valerius Laevinus returned to Rome, and the Senate swiftly raised fresh legions to replace the lost thousands. The Republic's war machine, driven by resolve and unmatched manpower, was already preparing for the next clash. Pyrrhus, king of Epirus, watched with unease. Still unable to grasp the Roman spirit, he sent his advisor Cineas to Rome with gifts and peace offers. The Senate rejected them outright. As Cineas walked the forum, observing Rome's disciplined troops and unwavering will, he returned with a grim warning. Rome is not a city to be bought. It is a nation that will fight to the last man. Undeterred, Pyrrhus pressed on. His army, now reinforced by Samnites, Lucanians, Bruttians, and Salentines, Italian allies eager to break free from Rome, marched north. He aimed for Rome itself, but its impregnable walls and strong defenses forced him to abandon the attempt. After failed sieges at Capua and Neapolis, and with winter approaching, Pyrrhus withdrew to Tarentum, his momentum broken. But the war was far from over. In the spring of 279 BC, he shifted strategy, launching a new campaign along the Adriatic coast, threatening Roman-controlled Apulia, a vital region for supply and influence. His goal was clear: break the Latin alliance, one city at a time. Two new consuls, Publius Decius Mus and Publius Sulpicius Severio, were dispatched with a full consular army to intercept him. The two armies met near the town of Asculum, where the land sloped gently toward a fast-flowing river. As the forces took their positions, Pyrrhus studied the terrain with a general's eye. The Romans had chosen their ground well. They stood on the far side of the river, their flanks protected by wooded hills. The Macedonian phalanx, so devastating on flat ground, would be vulnerable if forced to advance across broken terrain. Rather than risk a disadvantageous fight, Pyrrhus allowed the Romans to cross the river unopposed, drawing them onto open ground where his strengths could shine. As the two armies prepared for battle, the scale of the forces arrayed was immense. The Romans brought a massive host of 40,000 to 50,000 men, a full consular army reinforced by Latin and allied contingents, their legions bristling with swords and shields. Among them rolled 300 anti-elephant wagons, fitted with spikes, firepots, and ballistae. A desperate but ingenious attempt to counter Pyrrhus's most terrifying weapon. Opposing them, Pyrrhus commanded a battle-hardened force of 33,000, a blend of elite Macedonian phalanx troops, Thessalian cavalry, and seasoned Epirote warriors, backed by 19 war elephants, living engines of war, armored and trained to shatter infantry lines. It was a collision of systems, Rome's relentless manpower and adaptive tactics against the Hellenistic king's disciplined phalanx and exotic might. The battle began in the center, where the Roman legions clashed with the Macedonian phalanx in a brutal, grinding struggle. Shield met sarissa, steel rang against steel, and neither side gave ground. The Romans, fighting in their flexible manipular formation, absorbed the phalanx's thrusts and counterattacked with disciplined ferocity. On the flanks, the cavalry duels were more fluid. Pyrrhus's Thessalian horsemen, masters of the Macedonian charge, wheeled and struck with precision, slowly pushing back the more rigid Roman cavalry. With a thunderous rumble, Pyrrhus unleashed his elephants, 20 massive beasts that advanced like living siege towers. The Romans had prepared for this. Anti-elephant wagons, fitted with spikes and fire, rolled forward to block their path. For a moment, the beasts hesitated, but Pyrrhus's light infantry swarmed the wagons, killing the crews and setting them ablaze. Freed from obstruction, the elephants charged, trampling men, shattering formations, and sending panic through the Roman ranks, yet the legions held their tight formations and relentless advance, preventing a rout. Meanwhile, Pyrrhus's Italian allies, the backbone of his southern campaign, began to falter under the Roman assault. Sensing disaster, Pyrrhus committed his elite cavalry reserve, 2,000 Thessalians, in a desperate countercharge. The impact was devastating. The Roman front lines buckled, and for a moment, victory seemed within reach. At that moment, disaster struck. A contingent of Roman allied troops launched a surprise attack on Pyrrhus' camp, visible from the battlefield. They breached the defenses, set fire to the tents, and looted the supplies. The sight of their camp in flames sent shockwaves through the Epirot army. Morale collapsed. The phalanx, already strained, began to waver. Pyrrhus, ever the warrior, refused to yield. He reorganized his forces and launched a final furious assault, cavalry and elephants crashing into the Roman flank, inflicting heavy casualties. The Romans, exhausted and bloodied, could hold no longer. They withdrew in good order to their camp, having fought the entire day. Though the battle was his, the victory tasted like ash. His army had lost 3,500 men, including many of his best officers and elite troops, losses he could not replace. The Romans, though forced to retreat, had lost around 6,000, mostly in the later stages of the battle. Yet, in the days that followed, the true cost became clear. With his camp destroyed, supplies lost, and wounded men dying from exposure, Pyrrhus's army began to unravel. Reinforcements from Greece were slow to arrive. His Italian allies, once eager, now questioned his ability to win. Standing amid the wreckage of the battlefield, the dead, the dying, the smoke still rising from his ruined camp, Pyrrhus uttered words that would echo through history. "If we are victorious in one more battle with the Romans, we shall be utterly ruined." It was the birth of the Pyrrhic victory, a triumph so costly that it spelled the beginning of the end. The war would continue. But for Pyrrhus, every victory now carried the shadow of defeat. After his costly victory at Asculum in 279 BC, King Pyrrhus of Epirus returned to Tarentum, battered but not broken. His army was exhausted and he needed time to rebuild. Yet fate offered no rest. Two paths lay before him. Macedon, calling for his sword against a Gallic invasion, or Sicily, where Greek cities begged for help against Carthage. To the surprise of his allies, Pyrrhus chose Sicily. He saw more than war. He saw empire. A chance to forge a Greek dominion in the west, a legacy rivaling Alexander himself. In late 278 BC, he crossed the sea with 8,000 infantry and 2,000 cavalry, slipping past the Carthaginian blockade. At first, success followed him. Cities like Tauromenium and Syracuse hailed him as a liberator. His fleet grew. Hope flared. But victory bred resentment. Heavy taxes and forced conscription turned allies into enemies. The people who once welcomed him now watched with cold eyes. By 276 BC, rebellion stirred across the island, and with Tarentum under Roman siege, Pyrrhus abandoned Sicily, his dream in ruins, his promise unfulfilled. When he returned to Italy in the spring of 275 BC, the situation was grim. His treasury was empty, his reputation tarnished. The Greek and Samnite allies, who had once fought beside him, were weary of his absence and his harsh rule. Meanwhile, Rome had recovered, reclaiming its lost ground and reasserting control over southern Italy. The tribes that once saw Pyrrhus as their champion now hesitated. Many viewed him as a spent force, a king whose fortunes had turned. Still, Pyrrhus refused to yield. He gathered what remained of his veterans, men who had followed him through every trial, and filled the gaps in his ranks with Tarentine militia, brave but untested. They lacked the discipline of his Macedonian phalanx, but Pyrrhus pressed on, clinging to the hope that one final victory could restore his name and his dream of a Greek dominion in the west. To break the Roman grip on southern Italy, Pyrrhus set out to defeat their consular armies one at a time. His plan was simple in theory, but bold in execution. He would send a small detachment to delay one Roman force in Lucania, while he marched north with 35,000 of his best troops toward Beneventum, where Consul Manius Curius Dentatus commanded the main Roman army. The Romans had taken position on high ground near the city, a strong defensive line that Pyrrhus knew would be costly to assault head-on. Instead, he chose to gamble. Drawing inspiration from the Spartans at Thermopylae, he planned a daring night maneuver. A quarter of his finest soldiers, along with his remaining war elephants, would circle through the hills to strike the Romans from behind. Once they attacked, the rest of his army would move in for the killing blow. But the plan began to unravel almost immediately. Under the cover of darkness, the flanking force set out, guided by Samnite scouts who still harbored resentment toward Pyrrhus for abandoning their cause in Sicily. Whether by malice or misdirection, the guides led the troops deep into the tangled forests of the Apennines. Confusion spread. Torches flickered out. Units lost contact with each other. When dawn broke, the element of surprise, Pyrrhus's greatest advantage, was gone. The Romans were ready. Consul Dentatus, expecting a night assault, had his men prepared at first light. As Pyrrhus's troops emerged from the forest, scattered and weary, Roman skirmishers, the velites, rushed forward. They unleashed volleys of javelins into the disordered phalanx, breaking its rhythm before it could even form up. The rocky terrain, which Pyrrhus had hoped to use to his advantage, turned against him. The tightly packed phalanx faltered on uneven ground, its cohesion crumbling under the Roman barrage. Desperate to regain control, Pyrrhus ordered his war elephants to charge the Roman flanks. But the Romans had learned from past encounters. The principes on the wings raised their heavy pila and hurled them at the beasts. The weighted spears pierced thick hides and armor alike. The elephants panicked. Trumpeting wildly, they turned and crashed through Pyrrhus's own lines, trampling soldiers and spreading chaos where order was already collapsing. Seeing the battle slipping away on the heights, Pyrrhus spurred his horse forward, leading a few hundred of his elite guards in a desperate charge down the hill. He tried to rally the shattered ranks and then positioned himself with the cavalry on the right flank, determined to make one final stand. But the Romans pressed their advantage. Turning from Pyrrhus' broken flanking force, the legions advanced downhill with relentless force, crashing into the main body of the phalanx. The impact was devastating. The Pyrrhic left began to waver, then broke entirely, followed soon after by the right. Refusing to concede, Pyrrhus committed his last remaining war elephants in a final attempt to halt the Roman advance. Yet once again, the Romans met them with disciplined volleys of pila. The beasts, struck and terrified, scattered in panic through their own lines. At that point, the battle could not be saved. Exhausted and outmatched, Pyrrhus's soldiers began to fall back in disorder. Seeing no other choice, the king ordered an orderly retreat, hoping at least to preserve the remnants of his army from total destruction. His army was not annihilated, but it was broken, scattered across the hills, its spirit spent. The Romans stood victorious on the field of Beneventum, and Pyrrhus' dream of mastering Italy was over. The defeat at Beneventum ended Pyrrhus' ambitions in the west. His army was broken, his treasury exhausted, and his dream of a Greek empire in Italy and Sicily all but extinguished. Former allies turned away, Samnites in bitterness, Greek cities in disillusionment, no longer seeing a liberator, but a failed king. His once feared phalanx lay shattered, and his reputation, forged in victories over Rome, was gone. Though still a king in name, Pyrrhus knew the struggle was over. Isolated and weakened, he withdrew to Tarentum, leaving only a token garrison as Roman power swept through southern Italy. In the spring of 275 BC, Pyrrhus sailed back to Epirus with barely 8,000 infantry and 500 cavalry, far from the conqueror who had crossed the sea years before. His kingdom endured, but his legacy was sealed. A brilliant commander remembered not for the empire he built, but for victories that cost him everything.